Hi, and welcome to June for Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. We are technically coming to the end of season 4, but don't worry, there are lots of summer specials planned for July and August. And now, sit back and enjoy spending June with some of your favorite Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. Welcome, everyone, to an episode I have been so looking forward to because our guest, Laura Adkins, has written a book about one of my favorite women in Henry VIII's life and in history, in fact. An amazing and fascinating woman, and someone I have some questions about. So I want to introduce Laura Adkins and have her tell us a little bit, just a little overview of your book. And feel free to hold it up so those of you on YouTube can see it as well.
Okay, so here's my book and the lovely lady herself. And the kind of the angle I went with the book is rather than just a straightforward biography. I made life a little bit difficult for myself, being it's first time book as well. Was to look at the various roles she held throughout her life. You know, daughter, sibling, wife, queen, stepmother, actual biological mother, and just look at the how she approached it and what we could kind of get or figure out from her character and her personality into how she approached these roles. So yeah, I found that sort of quite a fascinating look into her life there, and I was able to sort of as well sort of tie it in with sort of or try and make her more relatable. You know, this woman from centuries ago. So something sort of for myself. Obviously, I'm a mother, now an author, and just how can you sort of what must you go through and things like that, and just try and make her a little bit more relatable to us nowadays. To an extent, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And one of the things I really appreciate about that approach and about how you look at her is most of us kind of meet her when she marries Henry VIII. And we know she'd been married before, but we don't really know much about those marriages. And we certainly often don't think much at all about her role, you mentioned, as a daughter and as a sibling and her earlier life. So, what can you tell us about that life when she is a daughter and a sibling and a part of the other households before she goes on to get married?
And so Kateryn was the eldest of 3 children to Maud or Matilda, she was born, and Thomas. Sorry, I didn't want to say William Parr because that was his brother, Thomas Parr, and they were both. They had quite close links to the early court of Henry VIII. So her father would have known Henry when he was quite young, and her mother was actually involved in the court of Catherine of Aragon, and they became quite close, much so that it's possible to think that Maud named Catherine after Catherine of Aragon. So there's that kind of it starts with a Catherine and ends with a Catherine,
Mm-hmm.
and they're actually linked. It's that kind of full circle, which kind of happens. And yeah, and Maud, where she was so close to Catherine, she kind of knew the workings of going on in the court, and was able to then sort of influence her children with that. Unfortunately, Thomas, Catherine's father, died when they were all quite young. And rather than remarry, Maud decided to devote her life to her children and be a mum to her children. And she sort of raised them. She adopted the new trend, as it were, that's come across from Europe, the humanist Christianity. The likes of Thomas More was following, and that women should have a good education as well as men. So she was gave her children that kind of good start in life and those connections. And I think Catherine learned a lot from her mum, and how she, what was expected of a wife and of a mother, and even this role impacted Catherine's brother and sister. So William, Catherine's brother, he would go on through his mum's and his father's connections to the court of Henry Fitzroy, the illegitimate son of Henry VIII, and he would build connections there, including two young Seymours. The name may sound familiar; they all interlink. And the youngest of the Parrs, Anne, she would basically, after the death of their mother, become a ward of the court and pretty much became a lady in waiting to most of the Tudor wives of Henry VIII. So she knew the goings on. William knew the goings on of the court as well. So when Catherine kind of came into the court as a wife to Henry, she had some connections with the court up until this point. She basically had her brother and sister there to help her out, and but she looked out for them as well. And William would be the first person Catherine would write to when she became queen, and I think there's these little links. Also, Anne would be the person that Catherine would go to when she got involved with Thomas Seymour after the death of Henry VIII. So I think these little things show that she really thought a lot of her two siblings and this whole idea of family rather than power, which some people at that time we
Mhm.
know kind of, it was power. They'd push their family in front of a bus. I feel not so much a bus, but to get the power. But I think she kind of kept those connections. And as queen, she still signed her name as Kateryn Parr. So even though she'd been married various times, she kept that Parr surname, which I think is a big indication on that importance of family that she held or she had.
I think that's great, and I really do, admire, like you say, that her dedication to her mom's memory and her siblings, and how nice that must have been when she came to the court in this sort of I mean, all of court was a little dangerous in some ways, but she really
Oh
came in
yes.
kind of a dangerous role as Henry's wife, but they were there for her, and that is interesting. And when you think about Anne having served so many of the other wives, what a great resource for Catherine when she
Yeah.
comes into that role. Um, that's just really interesting. All right. But even though her siblings sort of go to court fairly early on, Catherine herself has two marriages. They don't keep her away from court, but she's not right in the heart of court. So, what can you tell us about her two marriages before she marries the king?
We don't know much about her first marriage to Thomas Burr. There's various spellings of it, and there was even some confusion on which Thomas that she married, whether it was a young one or the grandfather. It's most likely that the younger Thomas Burr, um, and yeah, so she was quite young. He was quite young. They married. It was more just a marriage of sort of not convenience, but sort of a good match, sort of that Maud, her mum, looked out for her, like, and arranged it, and sort of it is believed that Catherine's first father-in-law was a bit of a control freak in a way, to put it lightly, and she was able to, or they were able to set up a household quite early on in their marriage. So the fact that she was able to, or they were able to move away, goes to show that she probably knew how to, not how to play him, but how to behave around her father-in-law. It was the first kind of household that Catherine was able to sort of set up, and she kind of learned the ropes there. But it was quite small, and they would have been away from court. This was up north, though, definitely away from all the goings on in London, and unfortunately. Thomas Edward Burr, sorry, so Thomas and Edwards. He passed away quite early on into the marriage, and although Catherine, her mum hadn't remarried, she knew she wasn't in a position to basically be a wealthy widow, and she wouldn't have been a wealthy widow, and she was still a teenager, so she probably wanted to go on, marry, have children. So she wanted to arrange another marriage to help support her, and there wasn't really any love going on with her in-laws or her ex-in-laws at this point. And sadly, as well, her mother had died
Mhm.
just before her first husband had died. So Catherine wasn't so much on her own. Obviously, she had a brother and sister, she had family members, but she was kind of on the outskirts of it all. And it is believed somehow she met a man, we know Lord Latimer, John Neville, of a northern gentry family as well. They were all sort of connections. It's believed
Mhm.
they were quite distantly related.
Mm.
And a marriage happened between her and John Neville. He was looking not only for someone to be the lady of his estate and of his manor, but also as a stepmother to his two children, John Neville, another John, and Margaret Neville. John was a teenager at this time, and Margaret was around 9 years of age. And Kateryn, so now she was not only had a bigger household to run, she actually was involved with a lot of the goings on around York, which is the closest or largest town or city near where she was. So she was really able to step up and learn this role was expected of her, and to sort of had to learn to be a mum,
Mhm.
um, which would have been a bit of an eye opener for her. But she seemed to be okay. She grew quite a strong relationship with Margaret. John, we're not too sure what went on there, but he was a teenage boy, so I think we kind of he'd probably developed his own personality by that point. He went on after Kateryn's death and basically was a bit of a scallywag. So he might have been a bit of a troublesome teen, but she did most likely her best, especially when during there was a rebellion called the Pilgrimage of Grace.
Mhm.
Um, Basically all these Catholics up north were a bit fed up with what Henry was doing with religion, or not so much him, his councillors, because you don't attack the king directly, especially Henry, and Lord Latimer basically being a of standing there. They were like, you need to get involved here. And putting it very brief, they raided his home and kind of set themselves up there with Kateryn and his stepchildren, and kind of said, you're involved. We've got your wife and kids, so you need to help us on this matter. So on the one hand, he's got his wife and kids being held basically to ransom, and then on the other hand, he's got Henry VIII, who's who had what sort of he'd, I think had someone boiled alive at this point for poisoning, beheaded a wife or two, or yeah, one wife at this point. So he was probably quite very scared of his position. Kateryn, on the other hand, she stood her ground, and basically, she's most likely in fear of her life, but although we don't know exactly what went on with her thoughts, she, I think, come out of it a stronger person from it all. And after it all, she was able to encourage John Neville, Lord Latimer, to move further down south, closer to her Parr family and closer to the goings on of court, and helped him, because it's thought he didn't really have much of a backbone. I want to speak politely of him, but he wasn't as strong as one would like, probably in a husband in the Tudor era. But she was able to persuade him, and then they were able to sort of appease Henry VIII and his councillors a little bit, and good behaviour and all of that, and they were able to sort of ride the wave of it all, even though a lot of the other ringleaders of the Pilgrim of Grace were well met nasty ends, fortunately, as was the case there. And it was why they were in London after the Pilgrim of Grace, a few years later, obviously, that she visited court often, obviously probably to see her sister and the goings on of court, and she met up with Mary quite a bit, Henry's daughter Mary, and it's most likely they struck up a friendship. And when Lord Latimer realised, he basically became quite ill, and it was obvious he wasn't long for the world. Henry, by this point, was grieving the loss of his ego, basically, because Catherine Howard had played away and lost her head for doing that. He was kind of a bit, getting on later in life as well. He was feeling a bit sorry for himself. And there was this lovely lady here who was nursing her husband. She was quite close to his daughter. She just seemed quite strong but kind. A lot of the things that I've learned about Catherine is she just must have been just a very kind-natured person. No evil motives or intents at all with anything. And he seemed to become quite drawn to her. and approached her and was like, will you be my wife? And you can't really turn a queendom down, let alone to someone who's already beheaded 2 wives. Um, she decided it was God's will, but whether that's how she just told herself that it was God's will rather than she didn't have a say in the matter, that's open to interpretation. And yeah, that's how she became his 6th wife, but he became her fourth husband. Um, but as he saw it, there was no skeletons in her closet by this point. He knew she wasn't going to be a virgin.
Mhm.
He knew kind of her background and everything. And I think by this point, he was like, just, don't want any excitement, just want someone who he could basically grow old with, a companion. And I think she ticked all the right boxes there.
It is interesting because he seems to have somehow, after the Catherine Howard debacle, faced his mortality just a little more, and
Mm.
is looking for an experience, not that she was old or dowdy or any of those things that
No.
somehow, she was not a nursemaid, she was not old and dowdy, but she was experienced as a wife and as a stepmother. And you mentioned that, at least with Margaret, there's a very warm relationship. And so he knew he has children too, that she
Yeah.
would be good. And she was with his children. So she comes into court. And I was going to ask just a little bit about her relationship with Mary. So she was in Mary Tudor's household for a little while, and they seem to have gotten on. I know Mary was treading some kind of thin ice sometimes with her religion, because she has officially accepted her father as supreme head of the English church. Mary had to do that, but she has her own beliefs, which were not exactly hidden all the time. Do you think she and Catherine had problems over the religion? Because, Catherine is moving more and more into this humanist, and then we see her really promoting reform. Do you think she and Mary were able to get past that, or was that a little bit of a sticky issue for them?
I think to begin with, before Catherine became, wife to Henry VIII, she was still kind of a bit more just of Henry VIII's religion, to put it simply, whatever you sort of
Okay.
want to call it. I don't think even he kind of knew roughly what was going on,
True.
and so they I think were quite friendly. They were quite close in age. I think there's about 2-3 years difference between them both.
Hmm.
They both had a love of fashion and jewellery, so I think there was that friendship there. And even when she became Mary's stepmother, I don't think she approached him and was like, "Oh, I'm your mum." I don't think she changed that dynamic of that relationship at all. I think she's just sort of still there as a friend. And even when it became clear that Catherine was more of a reformist religion and Mary was more of the Catholic camp, um, I don't. Catherine didn't let it, I think, get in the way of their friendship. She even encouraged Mary to do some religious writing, and was giving this woman encouragement that I don't think Mary had a lot of a high self-esteem. She had such a tragic life that she gets a lot of bad press for, and I think sort of Catherine was just showing her a bit of love and encouraging her, and I think although religion was a big issue between the two, I don't think it was. Maybe later on in life it may have been.
Hmm.
If Henry had lived longer and Catherine had been queen longer, um, it might have done. But unlike where sort of with Anne Boleyn and Mary Ann was like,
Hmm.
there
Right.
was that forceful tactic there. I think Catherine sort of was a bit more sort of kind of on the subtle approach, even though they had different core beliefs. Really. Well, not core beliefs, but different sort of beliefs with the relationship basically to the Pope. I think was that the big
Right. And
issue there.
yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, because what power does the Pope have, or what role does he really play, was one of the difference. Okay, that's great. And it does show, I think, um, Catherine's, like you said earlier, her kindness and her wanting to, she really seems to reach out to Mary and to Elizabeth when she marries the king, and really makes more of a family. So I wanted to, speaking of those two daughters in particular, during his time of being married to Kateryn Parr, Henry VIII enacts his third succession act. No king has involved Parliament more in the succession than Henry VIII, but he enacts the third succession act, which returns both Mary and Elizabeth to the succession. So there, I've heard an ongoing debate, so I'd like to get your take on it. How involved was Catherine in helping Henry see the value of returning his daughters to the succession and considering them, I guess, worthy of that?
Well, I'm of the camp where I don't think anyone made Henry do anything he didn't want to do, especially at that later stage in his life. I think he kind of was a bit like, I've got the crown on my head. But he was, I think, if not that he was able to be played, but I think if he was encouraged and things were put across in the right way,
Mm.
I think he was open and he listened to people, whether he agreed with them or not, but I think he appreciated at least people trying to speak to him but not tell him. And I think Catherine was quite successful in this. I think she had an input in reuniting all the Tudor family, Henry with his kids, and getting them back in the Acts of Succession. He may have already had intention to do so, but I think she maybe sort of helped. I think maybe highlight the love, the family aspect of it. That sort of, not say no one lives forever, but there was Edward, and he wasn't going to have any more male heirs, and just highlighting, look, probably something like, odds are Edward will go and live for, a long, long life, but just for your daughter's sake, you know, reinstate them. It's probably not going to lead anywhere, and just enjoy, your children, and it's, this family unit. Because I think it's one of the first times that they would all be under one roof for a short time, and it's probably all of them, sort of Henry included, where they first actually realised that, oh, this is probably what a family should be. And I think generally, if you're royalty, even with today's royal family, it's not going to be the normal like for the rest of us. But I think she was able to, I think, maybe highlight that side of things to Henry and play to his heart. Because he may have done a lot of things, but I think a lot of the horrible things he may have done in his reign was more, I think, through hurt. And I think it's just something that she was able to do with him, just kind of influence him, not whisper in his ear negatively, just be like, look, maybe, get Mary to court, get Elizabeth to court, let them sort of see who you are and let them get to know you, and bring them back into the succession, just to take that worry off his mind, really.
Oh,
But yeah, that's my viewpoint. There's no obviously set evidence. We don't know what sort of kind of went on. But that's what I love about history. There's always these debates on what we
yes.
all think may have gone on. But I like to believe, from again reading about her, that she was able to play to the heart of the man.
I really like the way you say that, just very gently and not telling him what to do, but very gently. So, thinking of that and how effective she seems to have been, let's look at a time when things could have gone badly between the two of them. So we know of an episode where there were some people, as kind and as warm as she seems. Of course, this is the Tudor court, and other people are grasping for power. And so a couple of Henry's counselors sort of try and set her up, and she prevails, which is amazing. So tell us that story.
So obviously towards the end of Henry's reign, and by this point it was clear she was of sorry, my little one's just appeared down below me in case anyone wonders what's going on. Um, so she was clearly of the reformist camp, and there was Catholics around as well of the Catholics. So there was these two sides, and Catherine being queen, even though she may have not been the leader of the, let's say, the Protestant camp, just keep things simple terms, she was obviously would be the figurehead, being the queen, and the Catholic faction was starting to get worried that Henry was basically not long for the world, and if she was left with a lot of power, she could have, and already did have this big influence over the young Edward. You know, he was 8, 9 years old. So she could have clearly had this big influence. So they were like, let's try and get rid. So then she's not there, and the idea was that they would then have the dominant faction in there. They knew obviously of her reformist belief. She had like kind of an open lecture in her suite of rooms, which all of this stuff Henry knew about and allowed to go on. But so they knew there was more to it. So one of them, I can't remember, one of the members of the faction overheard her and Henry's discussion one evening at dinner, where pretty much she kind of lost her tongue a bit, and it come across that maybe she was telling him what is right, especially in religion, which with Henry, you're really treading on thin ice there. So they whispered in Henry's ear pretty much later that night, who she pretty much to tell you what to do. She's telling you, the king, our lord, our head of the church, what you should believe in, highlighting probably her reformist beliefs and everything. And Henry was like, hang on, no, he's probably started to think, nobody tells me what to do. She's getting a bit too big for her boots, and gave them permission to investigate her and her ladies further. They were trying to search her ladies' rooms for banned books, heretical books, which it probably Kateryn did have. Sort of part of my research that something they did come across some books where it was believed that she got her ladies to smuggle out of her rooms to go to I believe it's her uncle or a family friend. Apologies, I can't remember the exact person. And get these books scurried away before they were found, because she knew, there was evidence against her. She wasn't going to be able to save herself. Somehow or somewhere along the line, and this is all could be like hearsay, Chinese whispers, we don't know, but Kateryn got wind of this of Henry's permission to give this investigation. And to begin with, she basically was in shock and in complete fear, because you just think, hang on a minute, she could lose everything, not only her own life, but her family would lose everything. There are a few stories. One of them is that a letter was left by her suite of rooms saying this is what's going on. And another is that Henry sent his physician to her one evening, because he heard that she was quite unwell through obviously this shock of what's going on, and sent him along to find out what was going on. And this physician told her, whether Henry's permission or not, we don't know. I know Henry did like to play games, so he could have been playing the two factions off, seeing who would come out dominant. She was able to get her act together. She approached Henry and pretty much placated the man. And was like, no, I wasn't telling you what to do. I was trying to take your mind off your sore leg. I was trying to, keep you occupied and, listen to my lord and sovereign on what he thinks basically I should be believing. And those kind of things, where she's basically playing to his ego. And whether he believed her or not, it was enough for him to kind of be like, okay, you're forgiven. But he didn't tell the Catholic faction about this. So the following day, him and Kateryn are in the gardens walking around all loved up. They've come along and with this arrest warrant, and he's like, what are you doing? Get out. I think he called him a knave, and he basically really berated this member of his court. I'm really sorry, the name's completely gone from me. I want to say Walsingham. It wasn't Walsingham, that was Elizabeth's reign. And made him look like an idiot. And I think the whole incident was Henry basically showing that although he was soon to die, he wasn't dead yet, and he was still in charge. And I think it was highlighting to both the Catholic and the Protestant faction that, just back off, I'll do what I want to do. I don't think he would have had any intention of having Kateryn executed. But if the right evidence was produced, I think he knew that his hands would have probably been tied on that. So yeah, I think sort of he was just kind of playing the two, but I think it was a wake-up call for Kateryn to realise how dangerous that position could be. And her sister was her maid of honour or a lady in waiting, and all these ladies were quite close to her, so she needed to look after them as well. So yeah, she was able to sort of work her magic and her charm. But I think, yeah, I don't think Henry was stupid. I think he kind of knew what was going on there, really.
Yes, and I do think he did play games with pitting people against each other and to see who ends up on top, and he seems quite delighted that Catherine ended up on top, that she was able to do what she needed to do. All right. So, Henry, despite thinking I'm still king, I'm not dead yet, does does die. And then Catherine has her chance to marry for love. And what does that look like for her? Because she's had arranged marriages, and the king was kind of an arranged marriage. I mean, her mother arranged a marriage, and then she sort of arranged her own with Latimer, but Henry was kind of, you can't say no, but this one, her fourth husband, this is her chance to really marry for love. But it did cause a little bit of scandal. So why was it scandalous when she married Thomas Seymour?
So Thomas was kind of around the scene before she married Henry VIII. Whether that's when they first actually met, or I think maybe they crossed paths, previously, because as I said, her brother William knew the Seymours pretty well. We're not sure, but they were attracted to each other then. However, obviously Henry had shown interest, and she was like, "I'm really sorry, Thomas, but I'm doing my duty here." And we kind of know that because when she does, after the death of Henry, and her and Thomas start this courtship in letters, she actually kind of writes the same, basically, if I was free to marry before I married Henry, if I was free to marry you, I would have married you then. So we know she had these feelings there, but yet, she's done her duty. She's married Henry, and yeah, and I think what's basically happened is he's died, and she's finally think, yes, I can finally sort of marry for love, for happiness, and not that she was unhappy in her other marriages. I think she, especially with Latimer and even Henry, she grew quite fond, and maybe love developed, but not kind of the passionate, sense. And yeah, so Thomas and her sort of knew they were free to marry, but they technically had to wait for a while. As she was queen, there was still a chance she could have fallen pregnant, and it was just the protocol. And I think Catherine had every intention of doing that, but so these letters went between them. They had secret early hour meetings at her estate at Chelsea Manor, in London. He would come and meet her, and we know all this with these letters where they're conversing between the two. And eventually they marry in secret. And I just think she just couldn't wait. And whether Thomas played on her strings or not, I think he probably did. She kind of lost all reason, and they got involved, and they got married, and then they realised they had to break it to the young Edward, and his court, including Thomas's brother Edward Seymour, who had encouraged the councillors to make him protector of Edward rather than a group of men helping him, like Henry had requested. He was like, "Oh no, put me in charge." So they were able to, between the two of them, because Thomas had quite a close relationship with Edward as well, being his uncle, to encourage Edward that it was a match of love, and I think even to try and encourage him to believe it was a good idea. It was his idea. They kind of put the seeds in his head. So when the news got broke, he was like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm all for it." So the court or the councillors couldn't be like, "No, we're gonna break this marriage up." So, and again, already there's already that indication that Catherine is already doing something a bit, I think, out of character for her initially. To sort of, she's getting involved in this, what's her stepson, sorry, her stepson, and encouraging him to kind of believe something that wasn't quite his idea, bit of emotional manipulation. So already she's behaving a bit out of character. I think it's like 3-4 weeks. 3 or 4 weeks, like they married quite quickly. So I just think she just fell head over heels in love with this man. She was smitten, and also she was finally able to do something for her. So yeah, they sort of got married, and then he was then able to move into a house at Chelsea. All of what was hers became his. She wasn't that wealthy as Queen Dowager, but you know, she sort of he was now head of the household. Um, and in her charge, she had the Princess Elizabeth. So some scandal erupted with that. But yeah, reading the letters between the two of them, they clearly were in love with each other. He had feelings for her as well, whatever you may go on to believe of Thomas later. He was in love with her as well. Weirdly, he hadn't married himself at this point, even though he was in his 30s, which is a strange
Mm-hmm.
thing, but maybe he had fallen in love with Kateryn quite early on. So we're not too sure, you know, that when they actually met properly, and knew their feelings for each other. And she got her sister involved, Anne, who I mentioned at the start, and it would be Anne and her husband, William, not her brother William, they're all Annes and Williams, who she would confide in about this relationship. And Thomas didn't know that Kateryn had confided in Anne, and he was at dinner one night with them, and Anne kind of hinted that she knew, and he was like, oh, okay. And that was quite, I think, quite a relief for him. And I think there was probably no going back at that point. The more people know, then it's got to continue. But evidence as a whole, Kateryn was very, very happy with Thomas, aside from a slight little scandalous episode, which, you know, I'm sure we'll discuss shortly anyway.
Yes. So we come to that. So she's been with Elizabeth before she marries Thomas. So Elizabeth comes to her household after Henry's death. And, you know, some people just assume that Kateryn will remain a widow forever. She's been married 3 times. Surely that's enough. As you say, there's this chance to marry for love, and she jumps on it, brings Thomas into the household. So Elizabeth's, and then Thomas's ward is Jane Grey. So with him comes Jane Grey. So now there's this really fascinating household of Kateryn Parr, a real advocate for women's education, Jane Grey and Elizabeth, two amazingly well educated young women, you know, and Thomas, who is now coming in as head of household. So a little issue develops with Princess Elizabeth. So this is during the reign of Edward. Tell us a little bit about that.
So yes, as a husband being head of household, no doors technically should be barred to him. But one doesn't think that they would enter sort of teenage females' quarters. But you know, Thomas had other ideas. It starts to come to light that basically Thomas started visiting Elizabeth in the early morning, not early hours of the morning, but sort of early-ish before she's had a chance to fully dress, coming in, good morning, and all of this stuff. And her governess, Kat Ashley, started to think this is a little bit inappropriate, but I think she was they're all a bit had a bit of a crush on Thomas, let's put it that way. So she left it for a while, and then he started appearing in Elizabeth's rooms again. And on one occasion, he still wasn't dressed; he was still in his underclothes as well. Elizabeth was in her underclothes, and I believe in one occasion he smacked her on the bum, which even we're just a bit like, this is a 14-year-old girl, this is a man in his 30s. If they were both single, he wasn't married, and one thing and the other, she's still young, but back in the day, she was of marriageable age. But he wasn't only married, he was married to her stepmother, who was sort of asleep in bed, no doubt. And Kat actually started to think this is getting a bit inappropriate, and also Elizabeth is princess. She's of royal blood, so this is dangerous territory. She tried to sort of approach Kateryn about this and kind of make Kateryn aware that, you know, he's doing this. And Kateryn I believe she speaks to Thomas, and he's like, oh, you know, nothing going towards, just a little bit of fun. And I think he stops for a little while, but it starts up again. What must have been going through Elizabeth's mind at this point? Don't know, but she's a 14-year-old girl. Thomas, by all accounts, was, you know, an attractive man. She probably had a little bit of a teenage crush on him. Although she probably felt a bit uncomfortable, she may have enjoyed this little crush, basically. Then comes an account that one day in the gardens, Kateryn holds Elizabeth, playfully, not like forcefully, but playfully, why Thomas approaches her, tickles her, and then cuts her dress down so she's just in her undergarments. Um, and by all accounts, no matter what happens, you just feel that that is really inappropriate for anyone to do. Um, and for Kateryn to have got involved, I'm not too sure what the explanation could be for that. But it got to the point where even Kat Ashley was, everyone involved was a bit like, this is becoming a scandal now. Kat approaches Kateryn again and raises it once more. During this time, Kateryn finds out she's pregnant with Thomas's child. So whether it's a hormonal thing, I mean, I don't know. I know hormones and pregnancy can do a lot to a woman's brain. So whether that was what it was, or she had a fear of losing Thomas, or by denying him, access to certain rooms and to Elizabeth, I don't know. But it's very kind of out of character for her to be involved in this. And then comes a report that Elizabeth is seen cuddling or possibly kissing Thomas, or he's kissing her. When Kateryn confronts Thomas about it, he denies it's him and actually says Elizabeth has actually come to him and told him about it, or he's seen Elizabeth kissing another guy. But he's just kind of trying to play it that, he's being the stepfather and, no, trying to tell Kateryn what's going on. But I think by this point, she's wised up to it's got to the point where it's going to be scandal. People are going to start talking if they weren't already, and something needed to get done because clearly her husband wasn't able to control himself, and something was going to happen that may end up with all of them in the tower or worse. So she sends Elizabeth away to a family relation of Kat Ashley's for a while. On their meeting goodbye, Elizabeth is very quiet, the record states, which is very unlike Elizabeth. She was quite a strong-minded woman, always has an answer for things, and she was quite quiet. So she must have maybe known that something wasn't right, it was wrong, and maybe she'd overstepped her boundaries, and that she most likely hurt her stepmother. Kateryn probably was very, very hurt by this betrayal. Whatever went on, I think Kateryn was sort of not only her husband, but Elizabeth was clearly liking that this embrace, liking what was going on. And the two parted, but within a matter of weeks, they were writing to each other once more about their love for each other. So the mother-daughter relationship had repaired to a point, which was quite nice. I think maybe Kateryn felt, get Elizabeth out of the way, get Thomas to herself. They moved to Sudeley. Sudeley goes, his home and estate, to prepare for the birth of her child. So she probably thought, look, let's just go our own ways and hopefully it'll all blow over. And there are rumours, and some people believe that they're true, that Elizabeth may have actually been impregnated by Thomas, because she was quite unwell when she was sent away. She became quite ill, and some people think maybe she was hidden away to hide the birth of a child. But we do know Elizabeth did have bouts of illness, whether they were feigned or real. Again, don't know. This whole Tudor, the Tudors kind of knew how to play games. Not sure. But some people do believe that it went further than just flirtation and touching, that it may have gone the whole way. What Kateryn believed, I don't know. On her deathbed, bless her, she had a daughter called Mary, and a couple of days later, like with Jane Seymour, it was clear that something had gone wrong, and Kateryn basically wasn't going to die. Thomas was with her. One of Kateryn's maids and close friends was with her, and she was rambling. She was in basically a delirious state, and she was actually saying, to Thomas, that you've done me wrong, and it is clear that the word she was using was relating to this incident. And he was like, no, 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 I love you, and calmed her down a little bit. But he was quite distraught when she did die. So there was love there, but I think this man allowed other areas to rule rather than his head. And this whole also this grasp for power that many Tudor figures did have, He just saw this power, and if he got involved with Elizabeth, there are rumours that he had tried to approach marriage with her or with Mary
Mhm.
before he married Catherine, and even after. There was talk that once Catherine had died about possibly marrying Elizabeth, but he knew that wasn't going to happen. Um, and I think without Catherine's influence, I think if Catherine had lived, he may not have ended up on the scaffold, losing his head. I think she was able to control him to a point,
Mm.
but once she'd gone, he kind of there was nothing to control this want for power that he had, and yeah, he made a play for his nephew, and unfortunately, as many figureheads or people of power influence in the Tudor era did, he lost his head on the scaffold, and
Yes.
poor little Mary was left an orphan at a very very young age, 6 months old, and she was placed in the care of their friend Catherine Willoughby, who was married to the Duke of Suffolk, before he died, close friend of Henry VIII, and at the age of about 2 years, she just disappears from record.
Okay.
So we don't know what happened to her, unfortunately. So it's quite a sad ending in that way for all of them, really.
Yes, it is sad because Catherine seems to have finally had this wonderful marriage and a child, and then it's sort of, dying in childbirth and all of that kind of all goes wrong. So, after, with all of your research that you've done and sort of getting to know Catherine in all these different ways, two questions to sort of finish up with. Which do you think of all the roles you mentioned? You looked at her through her roles as a sister and a daughter and a stepmother and a mother and a wife. And she was a wife 4 times. So that was a lot in those days. Which role do you think she really, and maybe more than one, she really enjoyed or that was really important to her, really had an impact on her of all those roles?
As a mother, even though it's a stepmother, I think that mother being able to sort of help, especially Margaret and Elizabeth being of similar ages,
Mhm.
just help mold and shape them and encourage them, and with the Tudor children as well, with Edward and Elizabeth, showing them a mother's love, which unfortunately they had never known, especially Edward, and just showing them that there is a mum, she does stay around, that you can love and let people in, sort of it doesn't all end in tragedy. I mean, see, the irony is Catherine was married for love and it ended in tragedy, but just yeah, I think being that stepmother, I think really, um I just think she just relished that, because even after Neville, her second husband, had died, she still took Margaret under her wing, had her come to court with her. Margaret unfortunately died at the age of 20, but she still kept in touch. John Neville's wife, she got her position in the court. So yeah, I think as a stepmother, she really was able to sort of, I think, have a big impact. As a wife, you can have an impact, but not as much, especially in the Tudor era. A daughter, a sibling, there are all these roles, and even which not touched on, as an author, as a writer, as a reformer.
Mhm,
But I think
mhm.
as a mother, she really helped shape those children. And I go in the book to say that I believe she had a massive impact on who Elizabeth became as a woman and as a queen, and that
Mhm.
I think is Catherine's lasting legacy. From getting to know her, I think, yeah, sort of that was the one role that I think that really helped sort of, I think, keep her going as well, with all the ups and downs of the Tudor court.
Right, and see, that's perfect because I was just gonna say, what do you want us to take away from this story? And so one of those things is, although her life ended in Elizabeth, you can see that impact. And Elizabeth saw Catherine in her role as regent while Henry was off trying to conquer France again. She really saw her as an active leader. So that is amazing. And I really love learning more about her, because we know she was there at the end, and then she's sort of been misrepresented for a long time as a nursemaid and not all that interesting. But actually, she was lovely and loved clothing and jewels, and really had this rich, wonderful life and personality. So thank you so much. Now, I have to ask, are you working on something else now? And where can we find you? And I'll put all of this in the show notes, of course, but where can we find and follow you?
So I have my own little blog called
Mhm.
the Local History Blogger, and that's where I just focus on the history of my local, my home county of Essex over here in England. Not been much activity on it recently, unfortunately, because balancing book writing, working, had 2.5-year-old, they involve a lot, and all of that. But, I'm hoping to get some more, but yeah, you can find me on that. And yes, I am currently, for my sins, writing another book, and it is on a character who most people, if they're familiar with the Tudor era, will know the name of Richard Rich.
Oh.
So I
Mhm.
am looking into his life and whether he deserves this whole reputation of being a villain, or whether he was just doing what his monarch asked of him. So yeah, so it's looking in, and also he has lots of links, or he owned a lot of land in Essex,
Mm.
where I live. So it's that kind of, for me, it's that tying it into my history blog as well, on getting those links. But yeah, so I'm focusing on trying to get that done. Hopefully, it should be done by January. That's the due
Oh,
date,
exciting.
and yes, promoting obviously Kateryn, and yeah, just doing a bit more of my blog
Oh,
as well as yeah, the
that's
two
so
and a half year old.
exciting. Yeah, no, that's really exciting to have all these things. And yes, I have always thought of Richard Rich as a bit of a villain. So I'll eagerly look to see if I've been wrong all this time. You'll have to persuade me though. I'm pretty I'm pretty
Oh,
convinced,
well,
but
I'm not saying my views on it, on what I think, but it's that kind of angle of taking it all, looking at what he was involved in, and why, yeah, why he has his reputation of a villain, and yeah, whether it was deserved. Obviously there'll be the conclusion in the book, but I think most people probably already have their made up. I'm not going to try and convince people on something that's not there, but yeah, he's just a very interesting. He was just involved with so much. I think he's a very interesting person to look at, and there's not an actual
yeah,
book on him, so
that
I've
is
just focused solely on him. So
no, that's
I
great
thought,
because he was
try to
involved in so many of these sort of complicated and scandalous kinds of things. And he could have been scapegoated for a lot. That happened certainly a lot in the Tudor court. Well, that's wonderful. We will all look forward to that because he shows up in so many places. It will be good to just do a deep dive into him.
yeah,
Well, thank you, Laura, so much. This has been such a treat and so much fun to just talk about Kateryn Parr and see her through all these lenses and what an impact she had in her day on these children and stepchildren, and then beyond her death, even the great impact she had. So, thank you so much for being with us.
thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to having another conversation with Laura down the road with a new book and everyone joining us again. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. Please, please, if I could ask a favor, think about subscribing, sharing with a friend, and maybe becoming a patron. And a big shout out to all of my patrons. I hope you're looking forward to a great summer with our summer specials coming up in July and August, featuring some of your favorite Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. Until then, let's keep looking at all the ways history shows us what's possible. Thank you.